Okay guys, so welcome dito sa ating YouTube channel. Ito na yung lesson 31 ng ating complex analysis. Ito na yung continuity, differentiability, and integrability of power series. So we will not show that any power series is continuous. Pagkus ang gagawin ko is by definition. So kayo na mag-analyze. Kasi importante dito is integration and differentiation of power series. Okay, so by example. Okay, so we have theorem 1. So a power series in the form summation of a sub n times c minus z naught raised to n for n is equal to 0 up to infinity 1 represent a continuous function f of s of z. So kung napansin nyo, lahat ng power series na gagawin lahat ng function ay may power series. At each point inside its circle of convergence, z minus z naught, so ito yung circle of convergence na. So where yung center is z naught, tas yung radius is r. Or number 2 definition, or way number 2 na theorem. So for each positive number epsilon, there exists delta greater than 0 such that s of z minus s of z sub 1 is less than epsilon whenever z minus z sub 1 is less than delta. So again, by drawing, paano ba magiging itsura niyan? So pagpasensya na yung drawing ni sir. So assuming na perfect circle to. Okay, so for example, ito yung ating origin. Tama, tapos ito yung ating imaginary part, ito yung ating real part. So magiging continuous daw siya once na, for example, ito yung z naught, ito yung center natin. Okay, yung z naught na yan is may radius r naught para sa una. So kumbaga, meron siyang radius r naught kung saan pag inikot ko, assuming ikot natin, so assuming na perfect circle to. Okay, so ayun sa kanya. Then meron pa siyang radius, meron pa isang radius na mas malaki. So ito yung kanyang ito yung kanyang power series representation. So ito na yung radius r. So let's say na ito ay broken line. So pagpasensya na sa drawing ni sir. Okay, so ayun yung una. Ngayon, sabi na, meron daw epsilon distance. So, ibig sabihin ng epsilon distance. So, may c sub 1 na nag-exist. Kunyari ito c sub 1. Si point c sub 1. Okay. Si point c sub 1 is something may radius na delta. Okay. May radius ng delta. Tapos, sa loob niya, ano si z. Tapos, ganito kaliit. So, assuming na napakaliit niya. So, ayun ibig sabihin ng pagiging continuity dito. So, meaning, ito yung buong function. Meron dito something na maliit dyan. Na kumbaga, parang yan yung parang, di ba, dati sa function, ganito yung ginagawa natin. Sa function, para maging continuous, may somewhere dito. May delta neighborhood dito. Ayan yun. Okay, dito naman parang circle of convergence na is delta distance. Napakaliit. So, tulad nito, napakaliit din ng delta neighborhood na yan. Na kung saan andyan yung epsilon distance, tapos may delta neighborhood, delta neighborhood dito, tapos epsilon distance dyan. Yan rin yung mga nangyari. Pag sa continuity, dito naman pag continuity sa power series, tapos complex number. Okay, so iba pa yung continuity ng power series pag real number. Iba na yun. So hindi ko na concern pa yun kasi sa advanced calculus yun dapat dinidiscuss. Okay, so ayun na naman yung kanyang figure. Okay, so pasensya na, hindi nyo masyadong na-drawing na maayos. So again, bilog yan. Para mas maganda tingnan kasi nga circle of convergence yung pinag-uusapan. Ngayon, punta tayo dun sa integration and differentiation of power series. So, hindi na ako nagkumuha ng theorem. Actually, may mga theorem to saka mga property. Hindi na ako nagganon. Ginawa ko na is by example. Kasi, ganun din eh. Ginagawa ko is, i-represent natin siya in compact form. Integrate or differentiate natin yung compact form niya. Ganun lang, kasimple. Okay? So, by differentiation of power series, obtain the series representation for f of z is equal to 1 over z squared, g of z is equal to 1 over 1 minus z squared, then 2, h of z is equal to 2 over 1 minus z cube, 1 minus z raised sa cube. So, remember, ano ba yun? Remember na lang natin. Remember na yung power series na 1 over 1, yung function na 1 over 1 minus z is equal to summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity ng z raised to n. So kung i-replace natin to by 1 minus z, magiging 1 over z na lang siya. Si 1 over z is just summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity ng 1 minus z raised to n. So kung i-replace natin ito by 1 minus z, ayun yung resulting. So ngayon, ang concern, kunin natin yung f of z is equal to 1 over z squared by differentiating ito. So ito kasi yung concern natin una. So for letter E, so yung sulat na ito. So for letter A, okay, so note that we have 1 over z is equal to summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity ng 1 minus z raised to n. Okay, then by differentiating this, pag din-differentiate mo to, this is equivalent to, okay, then by differentiating it, so differentiate natin to, differentiate natin yan. So kunya derivative ko to, ang derivative na ito is negative 1 over z squared, tama, equal to derivative na ito sa loob, this is summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity. Derivative na ito is bababa yung n, tama, bababa yung n, that is 1 minus z raised to n minus 1. Tapos derivative pa nung 1 minus z sa loob. So kung napapansin mo, ang derivative ng 1 minus z sa loob is negative 1. So yung negative 1, lalabas ko dito. So that is simply negative 1 over z squared is equal to negative ng n, summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity ng n times 1 minus z raised to n minus 1. So divide both side by negative, mawawala na yan. So therefore, yung 1 over z squared natin is just simply equal sa summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity ng n times 1 minus z raised to n minus 1. Okay, so therefore ito yung kanyang power series representation, o yung kanyang compact form nung f of z natin. So nakuha ko siya. Okay, next is concern natin is ito. So paano natin makukuha yung derivative o yung 1 over 1 minus z? So pag kinuha natin yung derivative nito, ito yung kakalabasan. Okay, kasi nga ang mangyari dito, ang derivative nito is 1 over 1 minus z raised to lang. So bakit nawala yung negative? Mawawala yung negative kasi derivative ng negative z is negative z, negative 1 times negative kasi may negative pa, kaya magiging positive. So again, for letter B, so note na we have 1 over 1 minus z is equal to summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity ng z raised to n. Pag dinifferentiate ko to, that is negative of negative 1 kasi derivative ng 1 minus z is negative 1 tapos times negative kasi negative yon. So that is positive na lang, positive of 1 minus z raised sa 2 equal to sa summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity, bababa yung n, then this is z raised to n minus 1. Okay, so I think wala na akong dapat kunin pa kasi derivative ng z is just 1 lang. So therefore, ito na yung kanyang sagot. So nagulat ka, medyo maikli siya. Okay, next. For letter C, since nasolve na natin yung kanyang second derivative, tama. So sabi na, obtain natin yung 2 over 1 minus z raised to 3. So may 2 na nakamultiply. Okay, so note, ang goal natin is makuha yung 2 na nakamultiply dun sa derivative. So meaning, kunin mo natin yung derivative nito. So paano ba natin kukunin yan pag din derivative? Okay, so before kukunin yung letter C, meron akong konting correction sa letter B. Okay, so I think correction na rin to pagdating sa A. Ito kasi nangyari. Okay, so kunwari ito yung unang term. Okay, yung unang term, ito pag expansion nito, this is z raised to 0, okay, which is 1 yan, plus z squared plus dot plus z raised to n. Ngayon, ano to mangyayari dyan? Ang problema, pag nag-derivative tayo, mawawala na to. Yung derivative na 1 is 0. So, kumbaga, paabante tayo. So, ano mangyayari? Aabante ito ng 4n is equal to 1. Ang mangyayari dito, this is 4n is equal to 1. Aabante siya. Kasi man 0 yun yung derivative nun. Ngayon, ang goal natin, kailangan 4n is equal to 0 kasi hindi naman siya Lorentz series. So, ano naman tayo, parang Maclaurin series lang naman yung hinahanap natin. Okay, so, since Maclaurin series, adjust natin to, replace natin to. So, replace n by n minus 1. Or I think plus 1. Tama, parang plus 1. Tama, plus 1. Kasi may dadagdagan tayo. Okay, kung plus 1 yan, therefore, this is 1 over 1 minus z raised sa 2 is equal to summation for n is equal to 0 na. Kasi 1 yan, no? Kung ginawa ko tong n plus 1, transpose ko yung 1 doon, di ba 1 to? Start tayo sa 1. Kung ginawa ko n plus 1 yan, magiging n is equal to 0 ulit to. N is equal to 0 up to infinity ng n plus 1. Tapos, n plus 1 minus 1 is n. So, that is z raised to n. So, dapat ito yung sagot natin. Okay, so again, pansinin nyo rin yun na nadi-differentiate natin. Kasi may na-differentiate tayong term na kung saan nawala siya. Yung 0 term nawala. Okay, so meaning sa first term na tayo. So, pero ang concern natin dapat nag-i-start sa 0. So, therefore, start natin sa 0. Ito yung sagot. Okay, so ayan, yan yung ating sagot. So, paano naman natin kukunin tong pangalawa? Pag dinifferentiate natin yan, ano ba magiging sagot? Okay, so I think pwedeng ganito. So, start tayo with this. So, we start by 1 over 1 minus z raised sa 2 is equal to summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity ng n plus 1 z raised to n. Okay, so gawin ko lang tong exponential form. So, exponential in nature. So, this is 1 minus z raised sa negative 2 is equal to summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity ng n plus 1 z raised to n. So, pag dinifferentiate yan, that is bababa yung negative 2. Tama? Bababa yung negative 2, magiging 1 minus z raised sa negative 3 na yan. Equal to sa, this is summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity ng n plus 1, then derivative with respect sa z ng z raised to n. Kasi yan na namin madi-differentiate dyan. So ito, pag sinimplify, this is just negative 2. Tama, sorry. Tapos derivative pa ng negative z. So ito may derivative pa ng negative z sa loob kasi. Derivative ng negative z. Okay, so yung negative to magiging positive na lang. Kasi derivative ng negative z is positive. Negative 1, sorry. Then this is 1 minus z raised sa 3. So tama, no? Pag dinifferentiate pala natin yun, ito kakalabasan. 2 over 1 minus z raised sa 3. So this is equal sa summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity. This is n, bababa yung n. So that is n times n plus 1. Okay, then ganun ulit. Pansinin natin yung term na to. Yung term na to, nung nag-differentiate kasi tayo dito, anong nangyari? Nag-differentiate, that is 0 plus 1 plus 0 plus 1 plus 2z plus 3z squared. Tama, ganun kasi nangyari dyan eh. Okay, so meaning ito na yung 0 term natin. Okay, ginalaw natin 0 term. So dito, gagalaw ulit yan. So that is, for n is equal to 1 ulit. Pagbaba niya. So that is z raised to n minus 1. Since 0 term ulit yan, re-replace natin ulit yung n by n plus 1. Okay, so replace again. So replace n by n plus 1. So pansinin mo yung mga observation doon. So that is simply 2 over 1 minus z raised sa 3 is equal to summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity ng yung n is magiging n plus 1, n plus 1, tapos ito magiging n plus 2, tapos ito magiging z raised to n pa rin. Okay, so therefore ito yung kanyang Maclaurin power series representation o yung Maclaurin series representation, yung compact form. Okay? So, hoping na nagets mo yung idea pag nagde-differentiate tayo. So, tayo naman natin mag-integrate. Okay, so for number 2, in the W plane, integrate the Taylor series expansion 1 over W is equal to summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity ng negative 1 raised to n times W minus 1 raised to n for kanyang radius of convergence or for kanyang circle of convergence is W minus 1 less than 1 along the contour interior to the circle of convergence from W is equal to 1 to Z. So, kunwari, pag integrate daw natin, ito dapat yung ma-obtain natin. Okay, so in which mapapalitan natin yung ating in W. So, para mapupunta siya sa Z-plane. Okay, so paano ba yung magiging itsura ng drawing nito? So, drawing ko muna. So, sabi niya, integrate daw natin siya along dito. So, assuming ito yung W plane. Okay, so kung ito yung W plane, assuming na ito siya, tapos may contour daw dito. May contour dito na from W is equal to Z tapos up to 1. Ito yung 1. So ito yung contour. So integrate daw natin siya dyan. So ito naman yung application ng integration dito. Okay, so anong gagawin natin? So ang goal natin, ma-integrate natin siya. So ang gagawin lang natin syempre, tulad nga nun, integrate natin to with respect sa W, with respect sa W. Tapos re-replace na lang natin sila lahat by Z. Kasi nga, magiging Z dapat. Okay, so, ang goal natin is 1 minus W. I-integrate natin with respect sa W. Equal to sa integral ng summation. So, along the contour C, for n is equal to 0 up to infinity ng negative 1 raised to n tapos ng W minus 1 raised to n. Okay, so since along contour C tayo, ang contour natin is from 1 to the Z kasi W is equal to 0 eh. So ang contour natin is just simply ganito. So this is just equal sa integral from 1 to Z ng dW over W is equal to summation, so papasok lang siya sa loob for n is equal to 0 up to infinity. Si negative 1 raised to n, hindi siya ma-apekto ng integral. Ito yung integrate. Integral from 1 to W from 1 to Z ng W minus 1. So ito dW, sorry. Tapos raised to n dW. So integrate muna natin siya with respect sa W. Okay, then saka natin ipalit yung kanyang tawag dito, kanyang upper boundary sa lower boundary. So integral dW over W is ln of W supposed to be. Pero sabi ko nga sa inyo, yung ln of W is equivalent lang sa logarithm of W. Okay? So note na si ln of W ay equivalent lang sa principal logarithm of W dito. Okay? So this is simply equal sa principal logarithm of W from 1 to Z. So, yan yung kanyang upper boundary. Okay, then dito naman equal to sa summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity from negative 1 raised to n ng integral niyan by power rule, by u sub, magiging n plus 1, no? Parang magiging ganito. So, parang lagyan ko to. This is W minus 1 raised to n plus 1 over n plus 1. So, by power rule. Then, yung kanyang boundary is from 1 to Z. So, pansinin naman natin dito. Ano ba mangyayari dito sa series after natin ma-integrate? After natin ma-integrate, gagalaw din. Okay, so from 0 term, yung 0 term natin, kunyari yung 1, magiging Z. So, nawawala naman yung isa. Okay, so, meaning, gagalaw dito yung kanyang, tawag dito, okay, sorry, hindi. Ang mangyari, yung 0 term, magkakaroon ng W. Tama? So, wala naman problema to be honest. So, for n is equal to 0 pa rin siya. Hindi pa rin naman talaga literal gagalaw. Okay? So, dito naman, pag sinubstitute natin yung upper boundary, this is logarithm of Z. This is logarithm of Z minus logarithm of 1, which is ito ay 0. Which is equal sa summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity ng negative 1 raised to n. Tapos, substitute natin yung z. Okay, so substitute natin yung z sa 1. So, this is just equal sa z minus 1 raised to n plus 1 over n plus 1 minus 1 minus 1 raised to n plus 1 over n plus 1. So, note, ito cancel din kasi magiging 0 na lang siya. Okay, so therefore, this is just logarithm of z is just equal sa summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity ng negative 1 raised to n. Okay, then multiplied by z minus 1. So, sorry, this is z minus 1 raised to n plus 1 over n plus 1. So, ganyan dapat. Pero, ang sagot is for n is equal to 1. So, meaning, adjust tayo ganito. Re-replace natin to by n minus 1, I think. So, replace n. So, replace n by n minus 1. And that is equal to logarithm of z is equal to summation for n is equal to 0 up to infinity. Tama ba? N is equal to 1. Okay, so this is negative 1 raised to n minus 1. Then z minus 1 raised to n na lang kasi n minus 1 yun. All over n. Okay, in which ito na siya. At napansin nyo, iba na yung kanyang circle of convergence. Yung circle of convergence na siya is yung modulus ng z minus 1 less than sa 1 siya. So therefore, ito yung ating sagot. At nakuha natin yung pinapa-obtain. Okay, so hoping na naintindihan mo yung pag-integrate sa pag-differentiate ng ating power series. So sa pag-differentiate, yung zero term bantayan mo. So pag nag-differentiate ka, nawawala yun eh. So otherwise, yung zero term natin may z, kunyari, yung zero term natin is nagko-consist pa talaga ng variable z or may variable pa talaga. Okay lang na mawala. Okay lang na hindi ka nagmalaw. So for n is equal to 0 pa rin yun. Okay, so mangyari nga lang pag constant siya, nawawala. Okay, so tingnan mo lang din kung yung zero term mo is constant. Ayun yung isa sa mga masasuggest ko sa inyo. Unlike naman dito sa integration is nagkakaroon siya ng literal ng variable. So, kumbaga, kung yung zero term is constant, nagkakaroon siya ng variable. So, kunyari, constant variable siya. Kunyari ito siya, 2w. Ganun yung mangyayari. Okay, so hoping na naintindihan mo to. So hoping na tingnan mo yung next topic natin sa ating power series, which is the multiplication and division of power series.